Hey, welcome back. Remember to drop a like to feed this fluffy like eating chinchilla. r/AskReddit. Serious Redditors who live in secluded towns, what is the darkest thing that happened in your town but is kept secret? Over the summer there was a guy found hanging from a tree on the sheriff's property. The sheriff disliked this young man and treated him poorly during his incarceration at the county jail. Many witnesses said that the day he got released from jail, the sheriff invited him to his secluded property and told him he could help him get back on his feet. 2 days later, a couple of teenage boys fishing in a creek discovered the guy hanging in a tree. Authorities was notified, no investigation was done, and it was immediately ruled a suicide. This boy was a known drug addict with no family or friends, so there was really no one to press the issue. The local news wrote a small article on "Man found dead from apparent suicide," and then it was hush-hush after that. It's just one of those things we will never know. That is uber fucked up. In Mom's seaside hometown, there's a decommissioned lighthouse offshore. Even though utilities to the lighthouse have long been disconnected and the building locked, residents have noticed the beacon turn on at late hours of the night, just for a few minutes, then mysteriously grow dark again. It happens so infrequently that the time of illumination can't be predicted. As I once described here, no one has figured out how or why this happens. Have any people been strangely obsessed with spirals in town lately? My anime senses are tingling. Was my first thought, sounds like my man's living in Kurosacho. We had a doctor everyone knew and loved. His wife had an accident a while back and he took care of her and their 2 kids. Long story short, he was part of a child pornography ring. His family moved away and he is in prison. For some reason everyone forgot about it quickly. They didn't forget, they just choose to not remember. The Garnerville Pits Massacre. Multiple women murdered at a remote swimming area in an old abandoned quarry. One girl survived but the killer was never identified. Not long later a woman was found dead in a storage shed owned by the sheriff at the time. They arrested a black man who was from out of town with no connections to the woman and sentenced him to life. It later came out that the sheriff had been having an affair with the woman but charges were never filed. Some speculate that the sheriff could be responsible for multiple murders including the bloody Garnerville Pits Massacre. Holy shit, time to go to the FBI with this one. When did this happen? And where is Garnerville Pits? Any more details? I tried to search on Google but couldn't find anything related. I found a Garnerville Pits in Carmi, Illinois, but nothing about women being murdered at a swimming area there. So either there is another Garnerville Pits, or the story is inaccurate in some respect. Everyone knows about the fun part of Centralia Pop, the spooky minefire, the ghost town, etc. What most don't know about was how divided the town became and how they ganged up on the kid who fell in, Todd. How they harassed him and accused him of lying for political gains. He was just a little kid who suffered a near-death experience, and his own neighbors started a smear campaign against him. Well, that's pretty fucked up. At least he made it out alive unlike some others in this thread. The doctor who tried all these wacky treatments to save his young patient from tuberculosis and became infatuated with her. After she died he eventually robbed her grave, mummified her and lived with her body for 7 years before being found out. Did not go to jail and lived his years out in town, I believe. There is a podcast called The Dollop that covered this story. Someone made a musical about it and it was put on last year. Not bad. One of the big songs was called "She Was Pickled and He Poked Her." I lived in a town of like 5,000. The only secret is the whole system is corrupt. One police officer got caught stealing painkillers, basically got a reduced and deferred misdemeanor, so in like 3 months it was off his record and back to being a cop. A cop's son lost it one night. Got in a fight with his girlfriend at the bar. My best friend was the bartender and kicked him out. 20 minutes later he is outside putting holes into the bar with a semi-auto. Amazingly nobody got hit. The cop's son also got his charges reduced from basically attempted mass shooting to discharging a firearm within city limits. I don't think that's even a misdemeanor. There's so much more. But the gist is corrupt people run the paper, the police station and the court. If you're in this circle you can do whatever you want, and if you're me you will get sentenced to 1 year in prison for 1 gram of weed. I got the fuck out like 10 years ago. I returned home from school one day to a very powerful smell of gasoline throughout my neighborhood and every emergency responder our town had. It was later found that a father of 3 little girls, who wasn't living there, tucked all 3 girls into bed and slit their throats. He gained access to the house by dismissing the babysitter. He then tried to blow the place up by flooding the basement with gasoline and calling the mom, telling her, "Come home, I've hurt the girls." Thankfully, the mom went to authorities instead. If he was successful, my house would have blown as well. The father turned himself in and has been in prison ever since. The daughters were memorialized with a playground, and the house has been torn down. I'm not sure what happened to the mom, but I've heard here and there that she has found peace in a new town. Not so much a dark secret, but my town houses a bombing range that is still in use. No one has ever met anyone who works on it, no kids at school, ever parents who work there. We never see planes or anything, but there is a guard at the gate. What was truly odd is that if you ask a resident about it, we all say the same thing: "Oh, the bombing range, there's nothing out there. Might just be unsafe, so they keep it guarded." Probably this. Bombs have a less than 100% chance of detonating when they hit their target. This has been a big problem in Europe, where World War II saw tons of munitions dumped into cities. Every week some farmer or construction company will find some. Sometimes the hard way. There's also sections of France that are uninhabitable, due to all the chemicals from the munitions. Lots of mercury and other toxic chemicals. If it's an active bombing range, and they're using only dummy devices, it's still pretty dangerous. The other option is it might have been a test range for chemical weapons at one point. See how wind/heat/etc. affects them. You don't want to go near that stuff if you can avoid it. There's a very wealthy area next to mine. Mansions, millionaires, etc. in one of the houses were leaders of a pedophile ring, and it all was handled very discreetly. No press, just talk of the town. Also, one mother was the one who exposed them with the help of the FBI. A kid also committed suicide in this area too, no press, and a girl rode her bike to a bridge and jumped off. In my own area a long time ago there was a Satanist church where a few dead bodies were left on the door. It shut down. Then another time newborn babies were being abandoned in dumpsters. You should probably move fame. My partner's family has a lot of farmland in a small, rural US community. Back in the 1970s, they went out to check on the cows, and 3 of them had been killed overnight, but in a very weird way. They were totally drained of blood, and their eyes, ears, tongues, and genitals had been meticulously, surgically removed. Each of the bodies were laying in the middle of a large indent in the ground, like they had been dropped from a high height. The marks on the carcasses and land were totally inconsistent with any animal attacks the family had seen before. The only explanation they could come up with was some sort of cult or an alien abduction. No one in the family wanted to talk about it because they were afraid of being branded as the town alien nuts. At the time, they managed to quietly inform the sheriff about the cattle slaughter, and they ended up talking to the FBI about it. Turns out there's been widespread reports of cattle deaths like this in the rural US since the 1970s, but no one has figured out the exact cause. No one talks about it to this day. My partner and I actually just learned about this from his mother recently, and we looked into it. We were both skeptical, sciencey, evidence-needing people, so we tracked down the now publicly available FBI files as well as newspaper articles from the time. There's still no satisfactory explanation for the hundreds of cattle deaths that have occurred across the rural US. There was even a new case in Oregon as recent as this past summer. About 50-60 years ago, my neighbor's grandfather chased away all minorities from our village. He set their houses on fire and destroyed the properties they left behind, so they never came back. There are very few minorities in my village to this day. Even tough, that guy is long dead. His grandson is married to the only doctor here, and he's a great neighbor. Well, nothing has happened to mine, but I heard of one town where there was a rapist/vandal that was getting on everyone's bad side. He had a really good lawyer and never went to jail. One day the whole town gathered around his truck and started shooting. When investigators came to town, nobody said anything. I think this may be the case in question. I live in an almost isolated, big, but still with traditional small-town mentality Christian town in the Middle East. After the Civil War, we had so many secret weapons hidden underground beneath churches and monasteries here, just in case, so we can defend ourselves against outsiders. During the Civil War, we were surrounded and attacked from all sides by many different groups, and it was a flawless victory. Only 8 martyrs versus who knows how many they lost. That was until an idiot outsider priest discovered the weapons, and instead of asking someone about them, decided that it was a good idea to inform the authorities. The army came and took all of them. We all hated that priest. He was also very immature, acted like a teenager, wore leather jackets and rode a Harley. He's a Carmelite monk, and everyone was glad he was relocated. There are still rumors that some weapons are still hidden under another church, but no one talks about those things. Those are stories that everyone knows about, but no one speaks of them. The town I grew up in is in southern Ontario, and there was a slew of child drownings back in '07. Something like 8-10 kids drowned themselves in the lake in the winter months, not at the same time over the course of a couple weeks. Anyways, all the parents of the kids moved away, and some were big figures in the community like hockey coaches and teachers. Nothing ever got on the news, nothing in the papers, not even on radio. No one ever talks about it, and no one knows where the families of the kids are nowadays. They all deleted their Facebooks and social medias, and it's just a general "we don't ever talk about it" kind of thing in the town. No one knows why the kids did it. No one knows why it never got any media attention. It's weird. I wouldn't say that it's kept secret, but it's so horrific no one really wants to bring it up. A young, early 20s, mentally challenged woman was out with a male family friend and his friend who were a little younger, I think 18 and 19 at the time. They picked her up and drove her to the woods, where they repeatedly stabbed her and then lit her on fire while she was still alive. She had rejected advances that they were making on her. Her body was found by hikers a few days after she was killed, and a few weeks later both boys were arrested. Both of them plead guilty, but offered no reason for why they did what they did. Normally I'm not for death sentencing. I have reasons I don't feel like further discussing, but the fact that they plead guilty and still could give no explanation is so sickening I'd make an exception. I don't feel like there is redemption for people that sick. In my hometown, the local high school is very deeply connected with the identity and the community of the town. So some years ago, it came out that one of the original beloved principals of the high school in my town was a pedophile and was molesting boys on the football team. This was happening in the 1950s, but the news came out rather recently when people started stepping forward. The guy was already long dead and gone, so I don't believe there was any legal action. The town just quietly removed his name from any plaques and signs, and there were a few news articles about it, but then that was that. It's a Christian conservative community, so it was a huge blow to the town's image. So not exactly a secret, but most definitely a taboo subject that no one likes to talk about. Then some time after that news came out, there was another beloved teacher at the high school that was caught having a relationship with one of his former students fresh from graduation. This guy was in his 40s, so it was rather creepy. The school totally covered that one up, and there is still speculation as to what happened, but that's the story I heard. All that is known is that the school removed him immediately without a word, and he was not seen or heard of from again. All his social media accounts went dark and he vanished. It was really bizarre. Not far from where my parents grew up is the town of Skidmore, Missouri, which, honestly, is a supremely fucked up place of weird, sinister stuff. The most commonly known incident is from the 1980s when Ken McElroy was shot to death while sitting in his truck with his wife, in front of the pool hall in town in broad daylight. There were dozens of witnesses who saw the shooting, which came from multiple firearms, but they denied seeing the shooting or who may have been responsible. The news stories from the time sort of painted McElroy as a town bully, almost like Biff from Back to the Future, except he was fucking violent monster who had beaten, figuratively and literally, over a dozen charges including theft, rape of a minor, remember his wife. Yep, she was one of the no-rape victims, and carried Ken's child at 14, and other general violent acts. Leading up to his town-sanctioned execution, he had the gall to appeal a 2-year sentence for shooting a geriatric grocer in the neck with a shotgun and nearly decapitated him. So, why did he do it? Because the grocer asked Ken's daughter to put back a piece of candy she hadn't paid for. People appeared fed up with this rampaging 5,270-pound thug who thought he could get away with rape and wanton violence. So somebody or a group of somebodies shot him at least twice and emptied quite a few rounds into his truck. No witnesses, and even his wife who was in the truck refused to identify the shooter. Thanks for watching. Remember, every like puts Mario Chinchilla closer to finding his gold coins.